And this is on, and yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Gosh, that's loud. Let me adjust that slightly. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Those of you in this room where we have a full house, which is great to see, and colleagues and friends and family joining us online, you are all very welcome to Yet's inaugural lecture. For those of you who don't know, my name is William Bloss, and I'm Head of College for Life and Environmental Sciences. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all and to say a few words at the start of the lecture. Just before I forget, in terms of logistics, there is a reception afterwards, which is in the Sportex atrium. So follow other people if you don't know where that is, and they will lead the way. And secondly, if you have a chance to sign the notice on the side there, it makes a nice souvenir for the inaugural lecture to take away with them afterwards. So please do that as well. So welcome to people who've joined us from within the university and outside. Welcome to people joining online from the Netherlands, from Greece, the US, and elsewhere in the UK. And Yet particularly asked me to welcome her family, to welcome her brothers, sisters, and nephew who have come over from the Netherlands today, and her friends from outside the university. Thank you for joining us. Yet grew up in the Netherlands as the youngest of four, she tells me. It was a very stereotypical Dutch setting, as her father was a bulb grower, and she tells me she even has some tulips named after her, which maybe you'll touch on later. She feels very much at home in Birmingham, but her Dutch roots come out from time to time, notably when the Dutch hockey team plays England. You don't seem to be wearing orange today, but we'll see. She completed her degree in human movement sciences at Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, where she specialized in exercise physiology and psychology. And after learning more about the specialization of biological psychology, she decided to complete her full degree in psychology in Amsterdam. She's continued to use this interdisciplinary background to inform her work and enjoys working with people from different disciplines in her research, which we'll hear more about in her talk. As part of her human movement sciences degree, she spent 6 months in Ireland at the University of Limerick in a research project exploring biomechanical effects in sprint athletes. She then did her dissertation project for her psychology degree here at the then School of Sport and Exercise Sciences in Birmingham, at the suggestion of her dissertation supervisor from Amsterdam, who had completed her PhD here in Birmingham. So there's very strong links from the outset. She enjoyed the place. She applied to do a PhD here too, and then worked as an RCUK research fellow for 5 years before becoming a lecturer. So that initial 5-month stay has reached 24 years so far at Birmingham, so we're doing all right. Aside from her research, Yet has really made quite significant contributions to the wider university in the leadership and citizenship space, notably in postgraduate research. She's currently Director of Graduate Research here in the College of Life and Environmental Sciences, working with academic and professional services staff across the university. And she tells me she particularly enjoys working with and for our postgraduate researchers. And I think the with and for is really important actually there. So in her lecture today, Yet is going to present her research related to stress, physical activity, and well-being. So please join me in congratulating Yet on her promotion and her inaugural lecture. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay. We're going to have to fill for a moment whilst we're juggling microphones. There you go, all yours.
Yeah. Good. Hello. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Bill, for the very kind words, and thanks all for coming here. And it's really good and slightly it's good to see all these different people from different parts of both my personal life and my professional life. So what I'm going to talk about today is the research I've done to date. And I tried to come up with kind of like a title and thinking really about what brings it all together. And I will show you some research related to stress. I'll show you some research related to physical activity, and what you will see as well is that actually the heart is actually really key to all of the things that I have done. It is the physiological heart as well, but also psychologically in terms of how we feel. So that's how I came up with the title, the heart of the matter. Also, throughout the presentation, you will see some pictures. I am not that creative. You will see some of the pictures that I've drawn myself, which will be, you will see them quite notably, which ones are drawn by me. But I got a bit of help with Copilot with some of those pictures. So first of all, starting with stress and the heart. And the reason why I became interested in this is that we know that psychological stress can trigger heart attacks. So there is evidence for people when they just had an anger outburst or any kind of like psychological stress. It could be even, when your nation loses a penalty shootout, which for both Dutch and English people, unfortunately, happens quite a lot. And actually for the Dutch, it even happened last Sunday in the Nations Cup. But we know that there is this link between stress and heart attacks. But what is happening during acute stress that could lead to those heart attacks? And that's really core to all of the work that I've done in this area, trying to address that. And again, looking both initially very much at a physiological part of it, but also then turning more at the psychological responses as well. Bill already mentioned that I came to Birmingham for 5 months, and that's quite a few years ago now. But that was as a visiting research student. It was part of my master's dissertation in psychology in Amsterdam, and it was under the supervision of Chris Ring and Doug Carroll. And we wanted to look at what happens during a competition stress task. So that was what we were interested in, and we wanted to see whether competitiveness was related to how people physiologically respond to a stress task. We had a great setup. So we had a Scalextrics game that participants played. So when I moved to Birmingham, the first thing that I did was I had to learn how to play Scalextrics because all the participants had to compete against me. And there's this highlighted sentence there that the competing experimenter was a highly practiced expert. So that was me. So that's my claim to fame in my first publication, that I spend a lot of time kind of like learning how to play Scalextrics. We also find some really nice findings in terms of the heart rate really went up when they were competing and often losing to me. So I thought, oh, this playing card games, that's good. So when there was an opportunity to apply for a PhD studentship, I thought, oh, I can do that for a bit longer. So so I applied, and I was accepted on the program, being supervised by Chris Ring and Doug Carroll. But the first thing we did was we wanted to look at a different type of stress task. As much fun as it was to play Scalextrics, there were some issues with it. So we wanted a more standardized task. So here, featured by Jules. So this was during my PhD, and you can again kind of see a little bit of the time there. So you can see a cassette recorder where we had a cassette tape where the task was displayed. And basically what participants have to do is they have to add single-digit numbers to each other. So the tape says 8, and then tape says 5, the participant says 13. They then forget the number that they have just said, and then they add the number they next hear on the tape. So 3, they add that to the previous number the tape has said. So very straightforward single-digit numbers, but we added some elements of fun or elements of stress, depending on how you want to see that. So the numbers started quite slowly. They then become more quickly. So there's a time pressure. Here you can see at the back is Vicky Burns, who is administrating the task here, and she was monitoring it. So in case a mistake was made, the participants heard a buzzer. We also had a camera in their face, and they were asked to look at themselves at the screen and just to make it more fun. Now, this task has made it recently to TV as well. Ross, I saw her as well. She is here, and I got a little clip of what was presented on TV. Sorry, Ross, of how the task runs in real life. Oh, so I will. Here we go.
Start of test.
This is a test devised by the university to mimic everyday stress.
4, 9,
16.
Ooh, is it possible to have it a bit louder? You can also see how the equipment has improved a little bit with regards to the videos and the tapes there. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So listen carefully.
Start of test.
This is a test devised by the university to mimic everyday stress.
4, 9,
16.
8,
17. It involves a maths task, adding up numbers at an increasing pace. 9,
1,
4. Thus looking at yourself on a screen.
7. Stop.
Perfect. How stressful did you find it?
My palms were sweating. I
Yeah.
got quite nervous. I could feel my temperature rising.
Yeah,
And my heart rate going up.
yeah. As you can see in the stress, the beats are a lot quicker.
Start of test.
So very nice modeled by Ross. Thank you very much for that, Ross. But the response we got from Gordon, the TV presenter, was very similar to what we get from our participants, that they do really feel stressed afterwards. So in terms of our experimental design that we wanted to develop a test to induce those changes, it worked really well. And here is kind of like just I guess some different findings of studies where we use this task, and we've got it in many different formats. So the typical one is 8 minutes, but even after 16 minutes, people get still very stressed. 32 minutes, it continues to be stressful as well. But what is really key about this is that the participants, as Jules is showing there, but also as Gordon was saying there, they're either sitting down or lying down. They are adding numbers, which is quite straightforward, single-digit numbers. But we quite reliably see increases in heart rate of about 20 beats per minute. So that is quite a substantial increase by just adding numbers. So in terms of inducing that stress, it is very good. And also, if you think about it, and that's where I think it's really interesting to look at that stress reactivity as well, is that those increases in heart rate and blood pressure, are they actually, what is the function of that? So if you think about it, when you go for a run, it's good that your heart rate increases because it helps you to get the blood to your muscles so they can work very well. When you are just sitting down, adding simple numbers, you don't really have that metabolic demand for that increased blood pressure. So over the course of my PhD, I did a lot of stress testing, so stressing out quite a lot of different people in different settings. And it was a really kind of nice and fun several years. And what you can see here is the research group. So you see Chris Ring, the supervisor, together with Doug Carroll. We all look slightly cold there. That was we were at the Grand Canyon in the snow, so and in the fog, so you can't really see the big hole behind us. But that is why we look quite cold there, and I don't think we were counting on it being so cold while we were there. The other person to spot there is Dave McIntyre, who has helped a lot kind of during my PhD, but also afterwards with regards to the programming and really thinking about how to implement our stress tasks. And it's also important here to mention George Kitas, who in the second year of my PhD joined the supervisory team. So it was productive with regards to publications. Some of them only came out sort of like after I completed my PhD. But I think I learned a lot of other things as well during my PhD, which has really helped me throughout my career as well. One of the things, spoken as a real nerd, analyzing data is good fun. I had really good fun with we did quite a complicated study looking at microvascular permeability. And I remember Chris and I looking a lot at data and really looking at how to analyze that. The other thing which was really nice, what I've learned and what I've kind of carried on in my research as well, is thinking about real life problems and turning that in a laboratory design. So some of the work that we did, so for example here, the influence of hydration status, that was driven by, we know that people are more likely to get heart attacks first thing in the morning. Why is that? Could that be because after an overnight sleep, people are slightly dehydrated because they didn't drink anything because they were asleep and they were also getting up. So could that be a reason? But I think one of the main things that I have learned and I have carried on throughout my career is working with people from other disciplines. So by the end of my PhD, I have published with more than 10 other people and really from lots of different disciplines. So Maggie Brown is one of them, a microvascular physiologist. Mark Drayson, an immunologist, and I already mentioned George Kitas, a rheumatologist as well. And actually all those three elements I have continued throughout my career. But really kind of setting that scene in terms of the importance of asking other people, asking other experts for advice in terms of supporting your research and really trying to think in good ways of how to answer exciting research questions. So one of the things that was quite key in the research that I did, and I'll talk a little bit more about rheumatoid arthritis a bit later on. But George, as I said, George Kitas joined the research team, and that gave an opportunity to work within a clinical setting and to induce stress in people with rheumatoid arthritis. What we found in that population was that their levels of inflammation, which is a measure of their disease activity, was related to some of their vascular responses to psychological stress. And that's something that I carried on afterwards as well. And this was very much driven together with Nick Payne, a PhD student of mine, where we wanted to see as kind of like, okay, so we've got those responses. In people with rheumatoid arthritis, we see that their disease activity influences how they respond to stress. And is that really related to their level of inflammation? But in that population, there was a lot of other things going on as well. So what we did in this case, we had healthy participants and we stressed them in one condition when they were just kind of as they came in. And then we induced some inflammation either through eccentric exercise or through giving a vaccine. And what we looked at in this case in particular was we looked at the ability of the blood vessels to respond to psychological stress. Now, when you get stressed, you see typically, as I've shown in one of the earlier slides, an increase in heart rate, but you also see an increase in blood pressure. Now, your blood vessels, in order to incorporate that increase in blood pressure, healthy blood vessels will give way, and they will vasodilate, so they get wider. And what we found was that when we inflamed people, we saw a decrease in that widening. So those blood vessels weren't as good in incorporating that increase in blood pressure and giving more kind of stress on the blood vessels. And that was quite an interesting finding, because that puts a lot more strain on the blood vessels, and that could be a reason why there is then an increased risk for cardiovascular disease. We continued with the work looking at blood vessels, and this was done in collaboration with Katrina Rendero and Ross. So you've already seen how Ross stresses people in the video. But what we wanted to look at here was, can our behavior actually influence how we respond to stress? So does it matter what we eat, for example? And that's very much the influence of Katrina. So Katrina works with flavanols, and what we wanted to see, and we know that they are good for your blood vessels. So what we wanted to see was, do those blood vessels, if you drink, in this case, flavanols, does that protect your blood vessels? And the brief answer to that was yes. So that was the good thing. Then we thought, okay, so can we also influence it in a different way with our diet? So we know that when people get stressed, they have their kind of like their comfort food, and often their comfort food can be quite fatty foods. So that's another study that we did, and what we found there was that if you eat a fatty diet, actually that has an impact on your blood vessels, and it impacts on their recovery following stress. And this was something that was picked up by the media. I think this is a bit of a newspaper bit from the Times, but it was picked up really across the world, really, in terms of how your fatty food could actually impact how you respond to stress. We then thought, well, can we put 1 and 2 together? So we then tried to kind of mix the fatty food with the flavanols, and we actually found that has a positive effect. So flavanols, it is in a lot of different foods, including blueberries and including grapes. So just to maintain my own stress this morning, I have eaten blueberries and grapes. So hopefully my blood vessels are coping well with the day. So this is very much kind of like focusing on the physiological responses to psychological stress. And as mentioned before, I'm interested in both the physiology, but also the psychology. So what you can see here in a slightly advanced way of Scalextric, so a computer racing game, this is 2 guys who play a computer game. They play the same computer game, but one is clearly a lot more stressed than the other one, who is a lot more happy. And how is that then, how does that influence how people respond to stress? And this is the work that I'm doing and have done together with Sarah Williams in particular. So right in that first study, which I did playing Scalextrics, we looked at competitiveness, and we looked a little bit at how people perceived the stress task. But working with Sarah, we are looking in a lot more detail, and actually really looking at what could really kind of like, what could be the, how people perceive the stress task. Can that really influence how they respond to that? And one way to look at that is using challenge and threat. So you see here 2 pictures, again drawn from Copilot, who are doing similar tasks, computer-based tasks. But what you see here on the left, this guy, he looks quite relaxed. So he would see the task that he has to do much more as a challenge. So he perceives that he has the resources or the ability to cope with the task that he has to do. So that is a challenged state. This guy on the right here doesn't look quite as relaxed, and he would see it as a threat. So he wouldn't necessarily perceive that he has the ability to cope with the demands of the stress task. And according to the theory, and we found some evidence for that as well, is that depending on how you perceive your own ability, or your own perception of your ability to cope with tasks, is also related to how you respond physiologically to the task. And I think another thing, and that's again kind of the work together with Sarah Williams, was looking at, well, how do we actually perceive stress and how do we perceive anxiety? So you might have quite a high level of anxiety, so you might have high intensity, but that isn't necessarily bad for performance. So what we did in these studies as well, we didn't just ask what was your intensity of anxiety, but also was your anxiety, do you think it was helpful or hurtful to your performance? And those are really kind of like interesting studies to then look at, okay, so can we actually intervene to see how people perceive their own resources? And this was very much, and I should have mentioned that as well, very much the PhD work of Gavin Trotman. Now, another thing where perceptions are really important as well is how good are we actually at perceiving our own heart rate? So we do know, and I'm very much guilty of that. I started this presentation in terms of saying, well, when you get stressed, you feel your heart racing, you feel your blood pressure going up. How good are we actually at being able to feel that? So when we say our blood pressure is going up, is that really an increase in our blood pressure? And that is again the work that Sarah and Gavin Trotman and Annie Ginty and I did as well. And what we found, what was quite interesting, was that it was actually the perception of your heart rate increase that was associated with the anxiety during a stress task as well. So really kind of, again, a really interesting point in terms of thinking about intervention. So how can we influence those perception of how somebody feels that their heart rate is going up? Because the actual increases in heart rate were not associated with their anxiety. So these are really good and interesting points for intervention. I will come back to that a little bit later. So I mentioned sort of right at the start, sort of talking about stress, but also talking about physical activity in your and your heart. So that's now the next part. I mentioned rheumatoid arthritis as well, and during my PhD, I mentioned George Kitas, who's a rheumatologist who at that time worked at the Dudley Group of hospitals. And during my PhD, he joined. He came to our school to give a seminar about rheumatoid arthritis. So rheumatoid arthritis, it's a disease that impacts the joints. But people with rheumatoid arthritis also have an increased risk for heart disease. So that was one of the reasons why I became interested in that. So I already showed some of the data where we stressed people. But we were also interested, and that's very much what I did kind of like after my PhD, in terms of kind of can we increase the levels of physical activity, and would that be a really good way to reduce the risk for cardiovascular disease in people with rheumatoid arthritis? Now, George has built a really good research group together in Dudley, where he was looking at, where he really kind of like combined a lot of different expertise. So there's Liz Hill there, who is a psychologist, George Metzios, who is a clinical exercise physiologist, and there is Joan and Nikos, two exercise psychologists as well. So really kind of like joining everything together. So what we wanted to do, and surprisingly, even though there had been that known kind of like risk for increased cardiovascular disease in people with rheumatoid arthritis, until that time, nobody had really looked at to see whether exercise could reduce that risk. And that was something that we set out to do in this study. So this was George Kitas together with George Metzios and Antonis Stavropoulos Kalinoglou. I can't say much about complicated surnames. So what we did, and this was the first study to really look at that, how exercise could be beneficial for reducing the cardiovascular disease risk. And we found it was good for their disease activity in general. It was good for their functional ability, so people were more able to do their everyday task. It improved their fitness level as well. But we were the first to also show that it really improved their blood vessels. So again, it showed that their blood vessels were better able to respond to dilate and to respond to when there was more pressure on the blood vessels. And that was really a cool finding in terms of how it also informed some of the guidance for incorporating physical activity in the disease management of people with rheumatoid arthritis. So this was exercise, but it was very much in a clinical setting. So what we then also wanted to see is how does exercise actually compare to a medication intervention? And we had a really unique opportunity there that you can see here, Amir Sandhu. He was a PhD student of George Kitas and myself. And he was looking at, there he is, he's still looking at it, looking at vascular function in response to medication. So the aim of that study was to look at, well, if you reduce the disease activity, do you then also improve those blood vessels? But he had used exactly the same sort of methods as we had done in our exercise study. So it gave us an opportunity to compare medication against exercise. And I know I've taught a module called Exercise as Medicine. So this is a really nice way of really comparing exercise to medication. And can we actually say that that exercise is medicine? And what we found was that both medication and exercise was good at reducing disease activity, and it was good at improving functional mobility. So people were more able to do their own their everyday tasks. But importantly, what we found was that exercise had that additional benefit for the blood vessels of our participants. And that's a really interesting point then in terms of really thinking to say, so well, if their disease is managed well, that might be a really good time to also then think about increasing the levels of physical activity to have those additional benefits for the blood vessels. And that's where the behavioral support came as well. And this was a big study that we did, again, with the team in Dudley. And that's when Joan Duda and Nikos Toumanos also joined the team to think about, okay, so how can we encourage people to be more physically active? So we looked at what are the reasons why people are not physically active. And as I mentioned, it's a joint disease. So things like pain and fatigue were common reasons why people said that it was difficult to be physically active. So those are all the things here in red. But what we also found was that actually reducing fatigue and reducing pain were the perceived benefits as well. So people knew that there were those benefits, and people who were physically active were able to achieve those benefits. So that's where it's really important to have that behavioral support. So how can we support people to be more physically active? And that's what we did with this study. So based on the self-determination theory, we had an intervention to increase the motivation or the autonomous motivation for people to be more physically active. So this is when we are encouraging people to really kind of increasing their motivation to really value the behavior that they are doing. So they are not doing the behavior because the exercise instructor says they have to do it, or because their rheumatologist says they have to do it, but they are doing the intervention because they want to do it themselves. Now, the intervention was very successful at increasing their autonomous motivation. However, it was less successful at increasing their fitness level. And there is probably another reason for it. So the first study that we did, our participants had more or less kind of a personal trainer, which was Antonis and George. Whereas in this study, what we also wanted to do was we wanted to have this intervention implemented in a general gym. But that meant that the participants had slightly less supervision while they were exercising. So again, this really showed that we really need to encourage people and really support them to be more physically active, so they can have those benefits. Now, the work with rheumatoid arthritis has actually, for me, led to quite a lot of other kind of studies and other opportunities. And again, kind of like working with many more people. There's a lot of work that is done by Sally, looking specifically at sedentary behavior in people with rheumatoid arthritis. But I've also worked quite a lot with older adults, and here together with Cecilie and Nikos, thinking about kind of like how is physical activity associated with pain and fatigue, particularly in older adults. With Marianne Hensman, I've done some work with multiple sclerosis. Again, working with older adults, with John Catlin and Katrien Seegaard. And with Sarah, together with Sarah Aldred, together with Noor, one of our PhD students, we compared Tai Chi and Zumba. And that is actually a study that made it to Trust Me, I'm a Doctor, which you can see here, the picture of that, our moment of fame on the BBC. But it has led to loads of other kind of things as well. And it has led to a really nice kind of collaboration with Shushu Chen and Mary Quinton as well, looking at how can we take advantage of the legacy of big events. So this is where you can see us here with Perry, the mascot of the Birmingham Commonwealth Games, and really thinking about that legacy event in the context of physical activity. And I think that is something that is really kind of, when making this presentation, I really thought quite a lot about kind of like how some of these studies had happened. And I think that's something kind of just thinking here about that first study. And that first study happened by attending a seminar of a rheumatologist who came to our department to talk about people with rheumatoid arthritis. That has really kind of like snowballed into loads of different things. It has led to some of the work being incorporated in European guidelines for physical activity, European guidelines for cardiovascular disease management. I've contributed to the development of the physical activity guidelines in the UK as well. And I'm now currently working on a project to actually develop recommendations as well. So really kind of key, and there's quite a few postgraduate researchers here as well. Do think about that. Go to those seminars and speak to these people. You never know what it might lead to. I definitely didn't know that those stickman pictures, that was way before Copilot, really led to all of those things. Seminars are good. You learn something. So I've talked about stress. I've talked about physical activity. Now, kind of like join it together, and that is very much something that I enjoy myself as well. So that's not just my research. You see here at different stages of my life the types of physical activity I've done. I've put some typical kind of like Dutch stereotypes here, by cycling and skating. England hockey, obviously I had to put some orange next to that as well, or if it's just going for a walk with friends. But physical activity is really good in terms of managing stress and in terms of maintaining your well-being. And it's a really nice way how you can use your research to really look into things that you believe in yourself and that you kind of practice as you preach as well. Because another thing, I couldn't see this one here. The nice thing about physical activity is that there are so many different ways how you can be physically active. So it could be playing a sport, it could be going for a walk, or it could be doing some of the chores in the house as well. That could be beneficial too. So this is the work where we were looking at how does stress exposure, when you're physically active, that isn't going to go away. Just because you go for a run doesn't mean that something bad or something stressful doesn't happen. But what we want to think about is kind of that link between stress exposure and those negative effects on well-being. So that is the bit that we want to take away, and we want to kind of not have that negative impact. And the work that we are doing is very much kind of looking like, well, physical activity could be beneficial, and that's the type of work that I'm currently doing, and I'll give some examples of that. So this is the work done by Laura Wright as part of her PhD, and together with Sarah Williams. And this is really kind of combining the physical activity and the stress and the psychological perceptions as well. So this is a quite complicated way of doing the stats, but basically just kind of what that shows is that being physically active is associated with self-esteem. You feel better about yourself. And when you feel better about yourself, you're more likely to see stressful situations as a challenge, so that you perceive that you have the resources to meet the demands of the task, rather than and less likely to see it as a threat where you don't feel like you can cope with that. And that has an impact on the way that you perceive the stress, whether you perceive the stress as more stressful or you perceive it as less stressful. And that on its turn has an impact on your psychological well-being. So this was a cross-sectional study. So we asked loads of young people to complete, well, when I say we, Laura sent out loads and loads and loads of emails to get people to complete this. We also looked at that in terms of in a lab-based study. So this is again the works together with Sarah Williams and Annie Ginty and Gavin Trotman. What we did in these studies where we were asking people to do an exercise task, and then they did a lab-based stress task. And what we did find that after they had done some exercise, yes, people were more fatigued, which is, you know, that does make sense after you've done some exercise. And they might perceive it more stressful and more difficult, but actually their somatic anxiety was lower following the stress after exercise. And it did an impact on their ability to cope and control. And what I didn't put on this slide, it also reduced their blood pressure responses to psychological stress. So this is really nice in a very controlled environment where you can look at that. But then what we also wanted to see is, well, what happens actually during everyday life when people have the choice to be physically active or not, and people experience stressful episodes just as their everyday life. And that's the work that Ross did. So that's together with Katerina and Nikos and Sarah. And what she asked was people to on a daily basis for 7 days, they were asked how much physical activity did you do, how much stress did you experience, but also how did you feel? Did you feel that you were able to cope with the stress, and how did you feel on top of things? And what Ross found in her work was there were no relations to physical activity and stress. And that kind of makes sense. As I said, just because you do some physical activity doesn't mean you don't experience stress. But it did have an impact on feeling on top of things. So it does feel like you can cope more with situations. So that's where stress could be physical activity could be beneficial for stress. But those studies were kind of, in a way, kind of like observational as well. So we then did, a few years ago, we started to do the residential, so that for our first year students to go to the Raymond Priestley Center. So this is together with Becky and Sam Lucas, and also Tom Nightingale was involved with this. So in this residential, which is around kind of like at the end of the first term, start of the first term in year one students, they go for a few days to the Raymond Priestley Center in the Lake District. And they have 2 days of physical activity as a group. And they do a whole range of challenging activities. And those challenges could be, as you can see here, climbing. It could be canoeing. It could be going for a long hike. And what we did in these residentials, we asked people, the students, in the morning and in the afternoon to complete a very brief questionnaire about how they felt, but also and how they felt with regards to stress, tiredness, anger, but also whether they felt more connected or whether they felt accomplished. And the findings from this are really interesting in terms of the students telling us that they do feel very much more connected to each other and they feel accomplished after a long and tiring day. They also feel tired at the end of the day compared to the morning. But some really nice quotes to really thinking again about kind of like how can physical activity help with managing stress. And these are some of the qualitative responses here. I enjoyed the walk and the sense of achievement that came with it. Loved being out in the nature. It helped clear my mind and relax. So some really nice findings to do an intervention like that with the first year students to support their well-being. And there is more to come. So this is the studies that I've done. We've got Liang here, who is together with supervised by Jess Woodhams and Fazila Duran, who is looking at people who are working in stressful professions. And we will be developing an intervention, a physical activity intervention to support their well-being. So what you can see here is in the lake, you can see those Jess and Liang are both swimming. So this is in November, it's quite cold. It's difficult to see here, but there's actually a little bit of ice there as well. They were wearing wetsuits. I took one for the team, so I took the photos instead of going in the lake. But really showing Liang, I guess, practicing what she preached is again kind of like being physically active. And another really exciting project that is that we are starting at the moment is together with so Sarah and I are working together with Fidelis Navas and Said Jabat. And we are working in community settings to develop interventions to support their well-being. And these are some pictures of a workshop Sarah, Said, and I did over the summer. And with this collaboration, it's really interesting how it started. And again, kind of thinking about how some of my connections in research have started. I've known Fidelis for a very long time. And we were going for a dog walk, and we were just both talking about the work that we were doing. And I was mentioning some of the things that I was doing, and Fidelis said, "Oh, I know somebody who you should talk to," and that was Saj. And that has really kind of like snowballed again into loads of different things. And having connections like Saj in the community has really helped us to reach a really amazing kind of like population and doing some really great work. So that is more to come, and that is what we are doing. And that is a really nice kind of like leeway as well to another big project that I've been doing in the last few years. And some of my colleagues might be surprised that I've been talking about research for quite a while and haven't actually mentioned Centre UB yet. So this is a Centre for Doctoral Training, and this is the team here. So with Jess Woodhams and with Vicky Gutierrez, with Laura Wright and Rachel Gifford. And this is really bringing together a lot of the different things that I have done. Bill mentioned the work that I'm doing with regards to postgraduate research and in my administrative kind of role, and that's really coming together in here as well. It is really thinking about that co-production. So the work we're doing with Sage, for example, is a very good example of that in terms of working with partner organizations to develop the research and how important that is. And it's also really emphasizing, again, that interdisciplinary research, which I hopefully have mentioned throughout my research as well. So this is the yet way of how stress, physical activity, and well-being are linked to each other. And just a little trace here, it might be a little bit difficult to see, but this was actually my heart rate trace on the day that we had an interview for Centre UB. So this was me under quite a bit of stress myself. My heart rate, so this is around the time that we had the interview, was sitting down 100 beats per minute. I don't know what it is now at the moment, I'm not going to check. But actually that is kind of, if I compare that with a regular day in the office, it's 100 beats per minute is substantially higher. What is interesting as well is that here I started to walk and actually I started to relax. I don't know whether that was because the interview was over, because I was walking, or because I was walking towards lunch. That could be another reason as well, but really kind of showing again that impact of stress. Last but not least, I've mentioned quite a few people. This is the heartbeat. This is really what matters, who you work with. I only want to work with nice people, but there's loads of nice people, which is a very good thing. So yeah, thank you to all the research collaborations, but also all the PGR, so postgraduate research across the campus, and my family, and friends, and that's it.
I just told her she could sit down, but maybe she doesn't want to sit down. Good evening, everybody. For those that don't know me, my name is Sarah Aldred. I'm head of the School of Sport, Exercise and Rehabilitation Sciences, which is where YET works. So it's my role this evening to give a vote of thanks to YET for educating us, for helping us to learn about her research and her career. And it's also my job to highlight some of the aspects of research that I found most impressive. I'm slightly biased, of course, because I was on some of those slides. No, but I mean, I think even for anyone in the room that has never heard about YET's research before, it should be very evident that she's doing really impactful work that touches quite a few different types of people, different communities. And actually, one of the things that is part of my job as a head of school is to really think about how we make research applicable in the real world. And for some people, I don't really have to think about that. It's very evident, and YET is definitely one of those people. Our school is has many different disciplines within it. And so, as you might have gathered, YET works across a lot of different disciplines. And that actually takes quite a talent. We do speak different languages, not just Dutch and English, but actually different scientific languages. And it's a bit of a challenge, actually, to gain respect in a different discipline. And I think it's pretty evident from the number of people sat in the room and the number of different disciplines that are represented that YET does that very, very well. We often have quite a bit of a trade-off, really, that, you know, YET is really a psychologist, even though she pretends to sort of drift across to physiology. I'm a biochemist by training, which sits more in the physiology kind of realm of life. But I think YET's been doing a great job of trying to convert me to sort of, I guess, understand psychology and very much respect it. So we often trade off. I know it's me standing between you and a drink, so I definitely will not labour the point. I think we've seen some incredible research presented to us, but presented in a way in which YET's friends and family have been able to access that. And I think, again, that's very much one of her talents. So please join me in thanking YET for this evening, and then join us in going over to Sportex and having a drink. Thank you.
Just checking, like, see my